I apologize, Commissioner Gilman. I believe you're on mute.
Nothing like starting it out like that. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Before we get started, I just wanted to check in with you to see if my mic was working. No, to see if public service has all the folks available that you intend to be bringing to the workshop.
Yeah, we have everybody here and we are ready.
Okay, it was also a very efficient mic check, so thank you for that. So we are now on the record. This is a workshop in proceeding number 24M-0493G. In this proceeding, the Commission's identifying and investigating the cost causation of residential development and other development of Public Service Company of Colorado's gas utility operations pursuant to 40-3-121. The Colorado Revised Statute. The Commission must complete this analysis pursuant to Senate Bill 23-291. So the purpose of today's meeting is to better understand some of the company's data filings, also see if there's any updates or additional insight as the Commission completes this important work. Most of those data filings were made last year in order to help us better understand some of the developments that we're studying in reference to that statutory language. So today is July 7th, 2026. I am Commissioner Megan Gilman, the hearing commissioner for this proceeding. I've been designated by a vote of the 3 commissioners to hear this matter and to issue a recommended decision for consideration by the full commission. Today's conversation will include representatives from the company only. For those listening but who are not on the speaking agenda today, including other interested groups or individuals, I would welcome written comments in response to anything you hear today or more generally on the topics being addressed in this proceeding. Written comments can be filed directly into this proceeding, which again is proceeding number 24M-0493G, or through the Commissioning e-filings website. Sorry. So this meeting today is being webcast on the internet and will be live at all times during the meeting, including during any breaks if we do take breaks, although we just have a 2-hour agenda today. So I'm not sure I'm anticipating a formal break at this point, but we'll see what's necessary. So if we do go on break or if you do not intend to be speaking, please be mindful of your video microphone at all times. So Mr. Mansholt, maybe I'll turn it over to you. And before we jump into some of the topics and questions that I was hoping to cover with you today, perhaps you could just provide me a brief introduction to who's here today. And before we even do that, are there any individuals on your team who you think will need screen sharing capabilities that we should let Ms. Federico know about?
I would say that Mr. Piquet, I think, is preparing to help introduce and lead this technical conference. You may have a few words as we start here this morning. In terms of sharing the screen, we don't have a presentation planned. So no pre-planned sharing that I know of right now. I apologize. Did I miss any other? In terms of all of our witness introductions, we have quite a few people. We're happy to go through those introductions now. It may also be, there's so many names to keep track of. I don't want, we could also do it by subject matter as questions arise, wherever your preference is, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, no worries. I think that's fine with me. If you all know who's there, perhaps just as we have an individual speak, they could introduce themselves just so our records are clear on who's here. But I think that sounds like a pretty efficient way to go forward.
Great.
Okay, great. So first up, since Mr. Mansholt, I was planning on roughly dividing our discussion in today into 4 general topics, the last being quite minor, I think, compared to the first 3. And those kind of mirror some of the advanced information we put out just to make sure you were sending the right folks and prepared, understood what we expected to talk about. So the first topic is on the revenue requirement calculations, especially project-specific revenue requirement calculations. The second would be more specifically on some of the data and information on the new business projects that were identified in the data request, then capacity expansion projects from the data request, and some of those knock-on downstream new business projects that relate to those. That wording gets very clunky, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And then perhaps a few questions at the end on the cost benefit analysis. So that was kind of the general order I was going to take things and topic areas I would divide it into. So don't know if you have any thoughts or issues with that. If not, we can dive right in.
That's fine with us, and I do believe that segues well with Mr. Piquet, who's also assisting our revenue requirements section of this technical conference.
Okay, perfect. If that works for you, then would you like me to just kind of get started on some questions and address them to Mr. Piquet unless told otherwise?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
sorry, Tyler. Yeah. Commissioner Gilman, this is Jason Piquet here. That sounds good to us. I just have a couple opening comments I'm happy to make, but it shouldn't take too long here.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for having us. Again, for the record, I'm Jason Piquet. I'm a regulatory regional vice president here for Excel in Colorado. We appreciate you having us here today. I'm joined by several experts here on our side. As we talked about, we'll have folks introduce themselves as their topics come up. But just know that we've done our best to get the right order of folks here to be able to be responsive to as many questions as possible. And as you know, of course, this has been a fairly unique proceeding that we've had to pull information together across multiple different business units. So if there's not a specific answer that we're able to get you here today, we're happy to follow up. As you remember, of course, the company's principal responses to the questions you've issued have come in largely a year ago. Our first responses came in July of last year, which we supplemented in October. We also provided some additional information last night. So this has been a process that's continued here. Since that time, the company has focused its resources on other important proceedings, including this one, of course. That includes the gas infrastructure plan and a gas rate case. And there's been movement of the company's internal staff, both within and outside of the company during that time. So we've got some new subject matter experts here today. But again, we'll do our best to get you the information you need, even if they are not necessarily, even if they were not here during the time that we submitted some of those initial responses. As an example, yesterday, or rather in late June, we received some additional requests from you on some of these projects in a series of questions. And last night, we filed what we reasonably could on those topics to help get ahead a little bit of some of the information being requested. It may have lagged a little bit through the commission's e-filing system, but hopefully that came through this morning at the very latest. We've not had a chance to answer all of those questions, however, and this is just due to the fact that there's only been about a week or so of time between that June 25th request and when, as we gather here today, of course, recognizing the holiday weekend and some other vacations that we were working around over the past week or two. And so long story short, we're happy to continue to get you the data you need and hope today's conversation is helpful to that. The last point I'll make here is that we've got two overlapping proceedings dealing with some similar topics at the moment. Those are two litigated proceedings, being the companies. We'll do our best today to avoid going into topics that are being litigated in those two other forums, but do just want to highlight for everyone here and listening that there are some other litigated cases that we'll have to be mindful of. But other than that, we're here to help you with your questions. And I'll kick it back to you, Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, thanks for that. And hopefully, especially being that the rate case was primarily focused on 2025 and the GIF is primarily forward focused, I think a lot of these projects precede kind of the overlapping time frame of that, but definitely let me know if you see a conflict. We've got Ms. Dundas here with us today also to keep us on the straight and narrow if things get complicated between the opening proceedings, but appreciate you pointing that out. But in one kind of in a way, we intentionally chose historical projects, first of all, because we had actual costs and actual usage, so we can like do a more proper diagnosis, I think, of how that all looks. But also it hopefully will keep us more out of any conflicts with those more forward-looking proceedings. Also, I haven't had time to look through anything that came in last night. So if in response to a question you think it would be helpful to bring something up there that you have handy, you know, we could have Ms. Frederico give you access just in case if you think like that might be the best way to respond to something as we go. So just flag that as we go, or if I can find it somewhere in there very specifically, like I think that would be very helpful since I just haven't gotten into it yet.
Sounds great.
Okay, awesome. So the first area I just wanted to get into was the revenue requirement calculation. So in the original data request, we had asked for project-specific revenue requirements for each of the projects identified, the new business and capacity expansion projects being studied. And I think the company had indicated this isn't something that like was done. So I think you were trying to maybe recreate it or look at that. And as part of that, we had a document that showed the company's response to that. So Ms. Frederico, I have that. Maybe I'll just pull it up as we talk. I labeled that Doc 1. These are named a little bit torturous things. So I just labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for Ms. Frederico so we could go in order. So maybe we can look at that first one, and I don't believe anything in here is confidential. I tried to scrub those as I went forward, so I think this was all publicly filed items.
I think that's right.
If you can go to the revenue requirement tab and then just maybe make the view be normal, whatever it's called. Click on view and maybe we can get it. Where do we go for the? Yeah, there we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so as we look at these, we have the different categories of incomes and expenses showing up, especially on this revenue requirement tab, which is in part collecting some of that from elsewhere. And then as we go down on public service line 41, which is the last line of data, this would be basically the total revenue requirement that was submitted by the company, right? For each project.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then if we go back up to the top, this is, and I'm really just trying to understand this data. So there's no like gotcha here. I want to make sure I understand what we're looking at. And up at the top that says at December 2023. So my understanding, especially with a revenue requirement of this type, is we're basically looking at like a point in time when this was done as of December 2023. This is what that looked like, kind of based on how much was placed in service, you know, at that time.
Yes, that's my understanding, Commissioner Galeman. At that time, it probably also takes into account depreciation up until that point, which could be affecting those net plant levels. But yes, it's a point in time look at the world.
Okay. And so with this one being December 2023, you know, I went back and looked at the timing of a lot of these projects. Some came online in 2023 sometime. I think West Metro has actually a very small amount actually placed in service in 2023. And the majority of the cost was in the CWIP or construction work in progress for West Metro. Does that like sound right to you?
That sounds generally right with my
Okay.
understanding.
So as I was looking through these and kind of trying to compare the relative capital expense of the project to the revenue requirement, I would generally expect those to like somewhat track with each other, right? Do you have the same expectation? One goes up, the other one goes
Yes.
up, like pretty proportional. Um,
Yes, that's correct. We
okay.
often use a rule of thumb on our side. Sometimes that's a little too high or too low, but yes, that's correct, Commissioner.
Well, I'm curious, what is the rule of thumb on your side?
I generally refer to it, right, not as a revenue requirement expert necessarily, but we usually estimate it as roughly a 10% rule of thumb. So if you think about the CapEx leading into a project, right, of course there's other O&M amounts or depreciation expense or AFUDC amounts to take into account, but plus or minus, you tend to think about that total CapEx expenditure over the life of that project. And once it's in service, you can think about that revenue requirement generally as 1/10 of those amounts.
Okay. Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Yeah, and there's kind of some oddities here. I'm not saying you put in the wrong data. It's just like this timing issue. So if we scroll down, West Metro, which is a $14 million project, if you scroll down to the bottom, it shows as a negative $64,000 revenue requirement. And if we chase on the other pages, it looks like just the vast majority was in construction work in progress and not actually in rate base at the time this was done, is what it looks like to me.
We're happy to run that down, but I agree that that seems like an
Okay.
anomaly because right, a project in service that had CapEx behind it is going to lead to generally a positive revenue requirement. If there's some QIP or AFUDC offset issues happening here to make that number go negative, I would just need a little time to look at those calculations.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's like the most pronounced where it's like it's a $14 million project. It doesn't actually in an ongoing way have a negative revenue requirement, but that's just apparently what it looked like in December of 2023. So in looking at, and then similarly in trying to understand these, if one of these projects were only in service part of 2023, like half the year, it's my understanding that revenue requirement would probably also look proportionally small for that year, like at that point in time, but then in 2024, it would kind of look more normal after it's been in service all year.
Right. So that goes to the rate-based methodology question. Assuming this was year-end amounts and we're using a year-end rate-based methodology there for our kind of starting line, our starting rate-based line, if Ms. Federico, if you could scroll up slightly. Since this is the title of the sheet was at December 31, and then informing that row 2 rate-based levels, I'm assuming that's going to be year-end balances. Then it won't really matter when in that year that project was in service. But if you're using a different methodology, of course, and I know this is an active issue in other cases, so I'll tread lightly here. If you're using a different methodology, that will of course change that rate base level. If you're using an average rate base approach, it's not going to be the level at year end. It's going to be 1/13 of the number of months it was in service.
Okay. So highly dependent on like how it's done. So I was trying to look at this and look for that rule of thumb that you had said you all have internally, because if you look across and try and just do like a pretty simple ratio of the capital expense to the revenue requirement displayed here, it's a little wacky, I think, because of just some of the probably newness of the projects, like some
Right.
are partially done, like whatever it is, at this particular view. So I actually used, and I referred to these in the decision we just put out on the 25th, several of the documents from the last GIP. So in that, actually attachments to your testimony in JJP1, there was Appendix 3, 4, 5, which just showed SSI, new business and capacity expansion projects there. And then Appendix 6 showed expected revenue requirements per project, kind of similar to what we asked here, only like in real time in the GIP there. So I looked at that. So happy to kind of show you through what I got there. Let me see. Yeah, so Ms. Federico, maybe you can pull up, oh no. I think it broke some of my. Ms. Federico, are you able to display that as an Excel rather than a Google Sheet? I think the Google Sheet scrubbed some of the data and made it not present.
Sorry, are you talking about the same document 1?
No, document 2.
Document 2. Yes, I can do that. It's just I have to just download it. So give me a second.
Yeah, no worries. I've found that happens sometimes. Some of the data doesn't come through. So hopefully that'll work through. So anyway, I looked at across like the SSI projects, some of the new business and capacity expansion there to try to look at what that rule of thumb was looking like. So here on the left, we've got the forecasted capital expenditures from those GIP appendices. And then on the right, the revenue requirement from Appendix 6. And you can see on the right, it looks like we probably get the most reasonable revenue requirement number the year after it's placed in service, which all kind of makes sense. So then I pulled that to look at the starting ratio and then the average annual reduction kind of in that ratio as it goes forward. It aligns pretty closely with what you were saying. There's a few anomalies here, which I would probably have to chase back and see what was going on, different types of projects, or perhaps we didn't capture all the expenses here. But more or less, it looks like the average without those outlier pieces of data is about an 11.23% starting ratio between the capital expense to the annual revenue requirement. And then about a 0.32% decline in that value each year, in the ratio, not 0.32% of.
Right.
And so
That makes
it
sense.
sounds like that somewhat aligns with your expectations for what a reasonable revenue requirement might look like.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, generally in the 10% range. So it seems like at least of the values I'm seeing here in column R, pretty similar to that. Again, maybe a couple wonky results that probably stem from timing or other QIP or AFUDC issues. But yes, that seems like it generally tracks.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to show this to you, but you can scroll down a little, Ms. Federico. It's all pretty similar. And then I actually didn't include any of the MAOP because it would take a lot of chase, and I think a lot of those are testing and things that may not be actual, just new pipe infrastructure. So okay, cool. Well, I just wanted to run that by you and see your thoughts on that in looking at other ways to kind of estimate the project specific revenue requirement rather than just looking at December 2023, which looks like it's just got some timing issues perhaps for several of the projects. So thanks, that's helpful to look at that relationship. And yeah, I actually didn't see a ton of variation. Like a lot of them are sitting right in the 11% like starting range. So felt pretty good about that. Okay. Thanks, Ms. Federico. You can take that one down. But that's helpful to go through. So anything else on revenue requirement or like this discussion? I'm kind of ready to move on to new business unless you had anything to add to that discussion you think's helpful.
No, I don't think so. It looks like you've looked at it in detail. Maybe just reminding everyone that again, we often don't calculate these project specific revenue requirements as we've noted, right? Those kind of all flow together into a rate case when you're calculating a cost of service or revenue requirement model in totality. Of course, right, we've recreated those here on a project by project basis to help get at some of the questions that SB 23-291 are asking of the commission. And of course to be responsive to your request, but just wanted to reiterate that that's not a usual exercise. Usually all this stuff is lumped together, and that maybe better informs that kind of 10% rule of thumb.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Okay, so we'll move on to the new business projects then. So we had identified several new business projects in the original data request. So first of all, some time has passed. So I know in part, we were asking about projected values, but also actual values to see to what extent the usage and peak has deviated or kind of comported with the company's expectations at the onset of the project. So maybe kind of more generally, before getting into individual projects, just curious if you had any updates on that, or if that's some of what was uploaded last night, to just understand if there's any updates to understanding how the actual usage and peak load is looking for these projects.
Yeah, I think at this point I'll lean on some of our other experts here who are closer to some of the new business projects. So I'll turn it over to the team to step in.
Hello, Commissioner Gilman. I'm Richard Lucero. I'm the manager of gas systems engineering here in Colorado. If you're able to, can you please clarify your question dealing with these new business and what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our new business, we do have from the original data response for each of those projects, kind of the expectations upon which the project was based in terms of the expected annual throughput, the expected peak demand, especially broken apart residential and commercial for those that contain both types. And just curious now, some of these are 2-3 years old. You might be at a different point in build out of those. There was some initial actual data provided last year, but to the extent some of these are kind of actively being built out, just wanted to understand if there are any updates to some of the information provided last year, especially looking at actual meter reads to compare to the projected values.
Of course. So when you have actual peak load, since over the last couple of years, we still have not had our design day. So we don't have the actual peak loads. We do have our CMM loads that project it. However, it's a calculation that's linear based on what we do see each winter. So we do have for some that did come online over the past few years, but once again, no actual usage yet. Once we have a design day, then we'll see those actual numbers.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Gilman, just
Yeah.
make sure that you're up to date on what we filed
Yeah.
yesterday and this morning. Not sure if it'd be helpful to bring it up or not, but we did file in response to some of these questions what we're calling attachment A in the docket, which includes things from where Richard was just describing as our CMM. This is available in e-filing. We could bring it up, or
Yeah, I mean, if you're able, we could probably give whoever wants the powers to share it. And then just to confirm, Mr. Lucero, the CMM projects what the peak is, kind of extrapolates off of a month. It looks at a monthly meter read, then extrapolates out the temperature and does like the peak day estimation from that, right? So it's like, it's still a base function of the actual usage.
It is just, once again, it's a month, so get it down to day and then hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if like a customer's total usage is lower than you expected, their peak demand is also lower than you expected, given the formula that you use.
Are you saying based off what they applied for?
Yes. If their actual usage is lower than you had anticipated, then this calculation of their peak hour demand is also lower by the same ratio.
So, I mean, theoretically, yes. However, we just can't compare that until we get an actual peak day.
Right, but in the CMM, as I understand it, like this peak day is anticipated based off the actual meter reads, like the actual monthly meter reads, as like the base input. Is that right?
Hi there, I can jump in and help assist on this question. Hi,
Mhm.
my name is Troy Nave. I'm the manager of the gas modeling group for Excel. I helped put together the CMM data that was filed yesterday slash this morning. So essentially the CMM data uses actual observed monthly meter reads, performs the regression to estimate what a linear path would be for any desired observed temperature. So what we're showing here is the change in the yearly loading from CMM from last year to this year. So ac- according to the question as I was hearing it before, you were understanding that the observed meter reads would change your regression and then change your total loading towards what we would see in a hydraulic model. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the premise of my question. If the actual meter reads are lower than you originally expected, then the resultant of that calculation is also lower.
Yeah, so it is an accumulation of all meter reads observed in that time. So if you have all lower reads, it would lead you to have a lower regression that would lead you to have the lower total load at design day. But it's not always the case. It just depends on what the trending data looks at from the CMM module.
Okay,
So
got it. But like in a
it,
per project impact, if a specific project had lower meter reads than expected, the result of that calculation of that project's share of peak demand would be lower than the original.
Yeah, from a per premise standpoint, yes, each premise gets their own regression. And so we might have a proposed loading for that premise that we use for our design. And if we have lower observed meter reads for those months, you could end up with lower total loading. But seeing how these projects build out, you have more and more premises that get added to those projects, is where you would see some variability where some loading gets added. The meter reads, the more you add, the more correlating data you have to use for the regression. So that's where over historical time that you see variations of certain loads going up, certain loads going down, just depending on what that observed data looks like.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Piquet, have you guys figured out, can you show what was uploaded?
Yeah, we can try to pull up what we've submitted. Just give us a moment here.
Yeah, no worries.
It looks like, Commissioner Gilman, I can do it, if I'm given permission to share.
Okay, Ms. Federico, can we enable Mr. Minshall as the host or whatever has
Yeah.
happened?
Yes, I just did. You should be able to share now, Mr.
Oh,
Manisha.
okay.
Just confirming that you guys can see my screen now. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay, so these are the new business projects. And then total load is in what units are we looking at?
Yes, so that would be MCFH.
Okay, so that's a peak hour, basically.
Correct. This would be the peak hour projection for design day conditions for these weather zones.
Okay, peak hour extrapolation, basically. And then residential load is there, the residential portion of that. Commercial is the commercial portion of that. Total customers is a count.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the count of total customers. And that's year beginning or year end?
That would be at year beginning.
Okay, cool.
For March specifically, yes.
And then just curious, if number 58 came online in that year, are they excluded from this, or number 58 just kind of got meshed in a little in the usage?
It's just dependent on when the report was ran. Throughout the year, as premises get added to GIS, this number could be increased as we see those premises come online. So I'm not sure if I completely answered your question there, but let me know.
Yeah, I'm just curious if the loads we're seeing segregated out the 57 units. I'm just looking at Aspen Creek, just a shorthand. Are the loads segregating out the 57 that were complete at the beginning of the year? So we have 12 full months of data for that precise number of units. Or if number 58 come online in April, do we have 2/3 of a year for another unit, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm quite understanding the question. Is there any way to get some more clarifying information there? I'm not
Yeah.
understanding the additional customer.
Are these new business projects still being built out?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So presuming there is some growth of customers during the year, does this load figure we're seeing for that year include those that might be on for a partial of the year, or that is segregated to only what was online at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, so the total loading that we're seeing here is the CMM projected loading for those 57 customers specifically is not representative of the total build out of the development.
Okay, got it. Great, thank you. Because it looks like, say, for Aspen Creek, we added 40 customers roughly in the year, but the loads are frozen in time at the 57 for 2025 and then at 95 for 2026. So thank you. That I just, it's a little hard when these things come in to understand if the data is all like apples to apples. We're looking at exactly this many, but that was very helpful to understand. Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you. This is very helpful. And then are there others, Mr. Manchel, too, that we should see what's in them?
We have filed other information, but not on this topic.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So this is the peak demand load, but not annual usage, right?
That's correct. This is the projected design day loading.
Okay. And is there any update that includes the annual usage based on that number of customers online for the whole year?
Not at this time.
Okay. Is that conceivably available?
It is conceivably available. We were unable to put that together for this today.
Okay. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, thank you for showing that. That was helpful. I think we can take it down. So Mr. Bouquet, probably some questions just on kind of process with a new business request to start us out here. It sounded like that was the totality of, before we go there, information updated on usage or peak demand in the interim. Is that fair?
I think that's right,
Okay.
unless someone jumps in to correct me.
Okay. That's my going assumption. Okay, so when you get a new business request in, of course, for gas service only, as we're talking about today, and that's hundreds or thousands of homes, say, they're going to be built out over years, maybe decades to come. I'm curious, just like a general description of how that infrastructure is sized, because there's kind of the immediate area infrastructure, some upstream infrastructure that maybe need to be upsized for the full build out. Like, how do you stage when you build out if you're getting a new business request in that has a really large number of units?
So again, I think it'll be a similar team here with Richard and Troy, but maybe others. You can walk through that process of scoping the full project, making sure that we're being as efficient as possible, because we only want to break the ground once, right, to make sure this is cost effective. So I'll hand it over to our new business experts here.
Thank you. So Richard Lucero again. So with those we obviously see a wide range of those developments. One that, like what you stated, might be 1 year, might be 10 years. I mean, we've had a few that have been going on for my career here at Excel. We try to work with them up front on their full build out. So then we don't have to go back in there, because then that's additional cost to the customer if we need to upsize the main. So we work with them, try to get the full build out, try to get the whole as-built for the plats for their subdivisions developments, and tried to anticipate their boundaries as far as how far possibly a rig station or meter station needs to feed out, whether it's a square mile, a few square miles. We definitely try to work with them up front before we start quoting, speccing, any of those things.
Okay, so in that regard, if let's see, you don't need to name it. I don't even know which one it is, but the project that's been going on your whole career, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of homes, whatever it may be. So your process is to get their full build out plans, and then essentially upfront when they start building, size all of the infrastructure under the assumption that that full build out is definitively what will happen.
Correct.
Okay. And then how do you look at that time at upstream impacts? Like, how far upstream do you go at that point in time? The load hasn't showed up yet in your hydraulic modeling, right? But it's kind of projected to come online. So how does this trickle upstream in trying to identify kind of all of the impacts of this new development?
So with working with the customer, get their full build out, we definitely look at upstream. I think that was stated in our last meeting about a year ago, based on certain loads. So if it's above 10 MCFH, we work upstream to see if there's any needed reinforcements, upsizing of that sort for these customers.
Okay, and then at what point kind of is that their cost responsibility versus the system's cost responsibility? I guess it would depend on the line extension policy.
That will depend on the tariffs at that time of the application.
Okay. Good segue into my next question. So this project that's been going on for your whole career, I don't know how long your career is there, but I'm just imagining this fantastical build out. Are they grandfathered in basically to the line extension policy at the time they submit that first application? Or is there a certain time period at which it's like, no, now you're on the new line extension policy? Kind of how does that typically work?
So typically, as long as they have go ahead.
No, go for it, Richard. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. So as long as they have formally applied for whatever it may be, filing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as long as they have formally applied, the line extension policy stays with those filings.
Okay, help me understand what's formally applied mean, or unless you need to add something, Mr. Forget, but it's just gonna.
Yeah, I was just gonna. Right, building off of what Richard's saying, right? There's phases to this development whereby at times, right, every project is different, and so based on the request on what the customer needs at that time, the applicable line extension policy at that time is what governs. If the line extension policy changes over time and there's other parts of this request that have subsequent formal requests coming to the company to serve during that time, it's going to be what's applicable in the company's tariffs at that moment.
At the time of the formal application. So, but there's nothing
right.
Like if I'm going to take 15 years to build a development, I can put them all in my initial application.
Well, I think I think what's important there is what's being requested at that upfront moment, right? If this is a large development serving a large number of residential households, you're probably talking about infrastructure that's off-site, right? So what's needed from a broader system capacity perspective to get service to that kind of property line. If then we're talking about in subsequent years, now you're talking about gas distribution main, you're talking about service laterals, right? Those requests might come later on. And so so there's a potential for various line extension policies in place at various times to be in play here if it's not all upfront given the size and needs of that specific project.
Okay.
Does that help clarify, Commissioner?
Yeah. Okay. And I don't know. I don't know how to know what's typical. You know, like if we've got 1,000 homes, like first of all, because everyone takes a different amount of time to build out, right? And then everyone might have a different infrastructure situation. So I'm just not like kind of generally, I wish I had a better understanding of like what is all going in one tranche up front, but maybe pretty situationally dependent. Maybe we can figure out in some of these examples, maybe that's the best way to kind of understand how some of this goes. And then, so walk me through, he had said formally applied. So what does formally apply entail?
I might kick this back over to Richard, right? Because our customers will work through the builder's call line, as I understand the process, but Richard can certainly go into more depth.
Exactly. Once they come through the builder's call line with the number of units and their loads, then they have applied. And that's when we work with our hydraulic modeling system to add in all those loads, the number of units, and how much flow will be on the pipeline to figure out if there needs to be some sort of on-site, off-site reinforcements.
Okay, so I'm hearing that formally applied means I call the builder call line. I say I have 3,000 units. I expect every unit is going to use X amount, or in total, we'll use X amount, and this is when I want it to be ready.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we have our own internal designers that will go back and forth to make sure everything is there that's needed, or if there is more of a build out, what can we anticipate?
Okay. Is there any like commitment on the part of the developer when you start all of this planning and then subsequent investments? Is there like a signature, an agreement somewhere?
So it's pretty much, we have had customers change their loads, number of units, but I would say it's fairly formal once they do get the bill and we give them a quote saying, all right, this is your load, this is the number of units, this is the gas lines that need to go into the ground. Here's your quote.
So you're giving them a quote for the customer contribution portion of whatever infrastructure needs to go in,
Correct.
up to a certain point on or off site.
Correct.
Okay. So you give them the bill and say it's going to be this much. It's going to be $3 million. But that $3 million might be spent over the course of a few years. When is that money due?
I'll invite someone else to answer if they can. It will be up front, and then yes, as far as whatever we quoted. So whether it's a mile worth of main, it's however long that takes to install, whether it's a month or a year.
So it's due before you start that project or once it's completed?
Before.
Okay. And then if you have that situation where a developer's like, hey, I know I said 5,000, but things got tough and now it's 2,000 units. But you put in that infrastructure up front. What happens then?
I might jump in here, Commissioner Gilman. This is actually a topic that's live in the ongoing gas rate case, so we might want to stay a little bit further away from that
You've
issue.
read more than me so far. Okay, no worries. Okay. At what interval do develop is there a regular cadence? Tell me if this is too close to Mr. Piquet, but I think this is like a generic operations question. Is there a regular cadence or interval at which a developer, you require a developer to, or developers typically update you on their build out plans? Now we're building a different number of units next year. Now we're building fewer units in total. Is there any regular cadence with which you expect reporting from them?
That's a good question. Again, I'll kind of defer to Richard on this. I know depending on the development, right, we might have more or less touch spaces with the developer based on the complexity and the needs. But I'm sure it again varies by project. So I'm sure Richard can speak more.
It really does vary. Some that add-on, such as your example, Commissioner, that add-on, since we did not know about that additional load, that additional number, that's a new application. We did not account for those additional houses, businesses, whatever it may be.
Okay, so if they adjust their number up, new application. Basically.
Correct.
New line extension policy, new, whatever, whole new thing.
Correct.
If I'm gonna build a development, it's gonna take me 10 years. I'm gonna build however many thousands of houses. You've said you're gonna upsize everything at the upfront so that you don't have to dig up the ground again. I'm curious, does that customer then have basically like reserved capacity coming to them? Like they're not actually drawing it yet. It's not going to show up in your hydraulic model as real load, but you're expecting it to go here. How do you kind of functionalize, do you reserve or allocate that for the customer that you understand to be coming and to use it?
So I'm going to restate it a little bit what you said. So the customer has applied, let's say they had a reinforcement, they have paid for it. If they have paid for it, yes, their load is so-called reserved on the system.
Okay. And how far upstream do you track that increase in load to look for potential capacity expansion needs upstream?
That once again hits that about 10 MCFH threshold. Then we send it upstream to see if our bulk system needs any reinforcements, if they can handle the load.
Okay, and that's looking at basically like every interim pipe segment from interstate pipeline down as necessary?
From all the way from our town border stations, where we buy from our upstream suppliers, yes.
Okay, got it. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I'm like jumping around a little because I like hear something and need to figure out how it works. Let's see. And so then in your okay, then I'm just curious also kind of generically, when a developer gives you, I think you've said for a lot of these projects, if not all of these projects, that your expectations for the throughput as well as the peak need are coming from the developers, right? Like that's the source of the data.
Correct.
And so how and to what extent do you kind of vet that to say, is this reasonable for however many single family homes or a commercial building? How do you assess if what they're asking for is rational?
So usually we do ask for an appliance breakdown so we can see what would they use on a peak day. So outdoor fire pits, we really don't think anyone's going to be outside in a fire pit at -degree days. So we try to get the whole breakdown of what they could be using, especially on those ones that do require any sort of reinforcements. We want to try to help them, so we try to work with them on verifying what they're actually using at each residential, commercial, whatever it may be.
So is there a certain size of request that gets this sort of back and forth with the company about break it down for us by appliance and let's back out things that are like not reasonable to be used on peak or likely not coincident? Like, is there a certain size threshold where you're like, now we're gonna, or do you do this for every single family home all the way up to 5,000 houses?
I'd say we try to for every single one. However, definitely when there's some sort of reinforcement or upsize, we really push to get those data points so then it helps out the customer and the company.
a reinforcement or an upsize, like off-site of their building, so they're causing more expense off-site.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Okay. And then I'm just like curious, do you track the success of those interactions? Like, do these requests typically change after that involvement? They typically go up, down? Like, I'm just curious, how does this go? Or you typically find what the developer submitted is A-okay?
I would say we're still waiting on some developments for that peak design day. But then it's also a calculation through CMM where we take the monthly and we get it down to the day to the hour. So can't really speak to that.
Okay, you're talking like actual versus the projected, like how accurate are we, right?
Correct.
I'm also curious, like just during the life of that interaction of, do you have your loads right for the request? I'm a little curious. What sort of movement do you typically see? Is it like most people are a little off base? Most people are really accurate? I'm just curious, like how effective that interaction is at like changing things.
It really varies. It depends on what type of appliance and even customers that move in there to use it. It depends how much they use each one. Some neighbors you can say don't use the appliances the same as others.
For usage, right? But if it's the same appliance, it's the same peak demand.
I would say still varies. People set their thermostats at different temperatures.
Right, but the design day, everyone's furnace is running at full blast, right?
I would say most.
Okay. So I wanted to get into a few more specific project questions on the projects on the list, if that works for you, Mr. Bouquet. Okay. So I'm going to start with Aurora Highlands, which is one of the projects. Let me get up like all my notes here. Too many sources. Okay. So if we go to Aurora Highlands, there was just a difference in unit counts. I wanted to verify for you what's accurate. So in your data response for Aurora Highlands, I'm happy to pull it up. Ms. Federico, that was document 4. On page 2, it indicates a total of 9,601 total units. And it gives a breakdown that just shy of 8,000 of those are single family. Yeah, there you go. So you can see there that breakdown, just shy of 8,000 single family, and then 48 multifamily. Do you see that?
Yep, we can see that.
Okay, so those two numbers add up to 12,218, not 9,600. So I wasn't sure which number we should actually be using for total unit count. Like, what is accurate? Do you see my issue?
Yes, I see how those numbers are not the same. I'll lean on Richard again to or others to chime in on what might be driving those differences.
Okay.
Yes, for that one specifically, we would have to dig into. We don't have an answer right now.
Okay, so let's just mark that as a follow-up item. Just curious what the accurate total count is and the accurate breakdown between single family, multifamily, townhome types is, if that makes sense. And then
yeah, we'll follow up on that.
Yeah, no worries. Later on in this data response, it indicates that at the time of the 2025 data, 1,017 units had been built out of the total. Does that sound fair? We can go down.
Yeah, if you could just scroll down a little bit so we can all see it, that
There you
might
go.
help,
Right in the
Commissioner.
middle,
Yep.
1,017 active residential. I was just curious if you were aware if those were single family, townhome, multifamily, if there's like any insight into that?
That we can only speak to that they're residential. We don't have a breakdown of if they're multifamily, single family. We don't have that breakdown.
Okay, so you don't have internal recording as to the type of premises that come online?
Correct.
There's no recording in your customer database about the type of property?
It's just the rate code. So if it's commercial, residential, industrial.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. So for the residential portion of the project, the company indicated right here in the middle of this page that you had used an estimate of about 6 decatherms a month, so totaling 72 decatherms a year. It doesn't say that, but I did the math. For how much each average residence would likely use. So it looks like the actual average right below that, yeah, just a bit below, was 62.1 decatherms annually per customer. See that in the second box from the bottom?
Yeah, just reading the whole thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no worries.
Do not have an answer currently for you.
Yeah, Ms. Thorpe.
This is Megan Thorpe. I'm a senior engineer on the gas strategic planning team. Could you repeat the question and I can see if I can maybe help address it?
Yeah, just trying to understand in a way kind of projected versus actuals for this project. It looks like we've only got 1,017 active residential properties. So it looks in the second box like the company's assumption was that the annual usage would be around 6 decatherms a month, which would be 72 decatherms a year. And in the second from the bottom box, it looks like we identify the average actual annual usage of those 1,017, I presume, at 62.1 decatherms for the year. So I just want to make sure those we're talking about the same thing. Like one is projected and one is actual, but that is a comparison.
Yeah, great question. So the answer that's higher up on the page was calculated using annual usage per customer based off the rate codes. So that was a calculated value, so not one we use in design day planning and not project specific projected or actual. If that helps clarify that higher up value of the 6 decatherms per month.
Okay, so the origin of the 6 decatherms per month you're saying is like the residential rate code, which I think I heard from Ms. Lucero includes, it could be single family, multifamily, townhome, whatever, if it's residential. That's what, like the average, that annual usage that you tend to see per customer?
I think that's generally correct. It's used in sales forecasting, which I'm not an expert in, but those are where those values came from, is a usage per customer by rate code used in sales forecasting.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And so, okay. So that was like generally the expectation, but if I'm looking at the second from the bottom box, the actual that we've seen thus far for the 1,017 premises for 2025 was 62.1 decatherms for the year. So beating your average a little bit and more efficient or whatever, right?
Yes, that generally sounds correct.
Okay. 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 Sorry, I'm just checking on my questions here. On page 6 of this, if we can go down a little bit. The company provided the average annual revenue per customer expectation. And that is, where is it? That's where my notes said it was. Maybe on the page right before. All right, I'll find it, but we do have it.
I think it was
sorry.
on page 5, Commissioner, right
Page
there
5.
in this,
Right.
in the penultimate row. Yep.
Sorry, which row?
Maybe I'm referring to a different row, but you were wondering about the revenue.
That's a net revenue
For a
requirement.
project?
There should be
Oh,
a
okay.
place where it looks at the expected revenue per customer. Let me see. I can find it really quick. I had it. I just must have written down the wrong page.
There it is on the top of page 6. It looks like second row.
Ah, yes, there we are. Okay. Okay, so when the company then identified the average annual revenue per customer expectation, are you familiar with this based on the assumption of the 72 decatherms per year of usage? That seems to be from the rate code of residential as like what's used in, I think we heard from Ms. Thorpe, that's the general revenue forecasting number. So it makes sense to me that's the usage that's based on, but I was just curious if you could clarify.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Megan could confirm that as well. It seems reasonable that it would be the expected use multiplied by the base rate charge there. But we'll let the team confirm.
Sure.
Yeah, the values that I was discussing above were were tied to the sales forecasting. So I guess I'm not familiar enough to confidently speak to this area.
Okay, maybe we can have you all clarify just what amount of usage the 329 assumes in a yearly basis, basically.
Yep, we can take that as an action item.
Okay. Are we familiar for the Aurora Highlands project, which to my understanding started in 2020, somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 homes potentially, depending how our numbers shake out here. Can you give me any insights as to the build out schedule and like kind of expected conclusion of construction? It seems like we had just over 1,000 constructed by 2025, and I think it started in 2020. So just curious, like what insights do we have on what that build out schedule looks like and how has that kind of evolved over the years?
Specific to the Aurora Highlands project, right, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see if we can pull up those the multi-year build out here
Okay.
to get you an answer. I don't think we have it at our fingertips.
Okay, we can circle back to that. I'll just need myself some sort of color coding to come back to that. For the Aurora Highlands project, this is probably a Mr. Lucero question. The company identified that prior to the project, this is like a few pages down. I think we asked this, or no, it's right there, right on our page. 18A 10, or right, kind of third from the bottom. So we've asked, prior to the project, how much upstream capacity was available, and the company to answer that 431.3 MSCFH was available. And then after construction of the project, the next box down, how much is available, and the company identified there was no available capacity after this project. And then we had asked if the company had identified any upstream capacity constraint, and the company responded that they did not. I'm just having a little bit of trouble understanding that combination of information. If we've gone down to 0 available capacity, seems like a capacity constraint, I guess.
Yeah, this is Megan again. I can speak to this at a high level. With this new business project and the provided information, it seems likely that it was sized to serve their request specifically. And so that's the reason for those details there.
What are you saying was sized to serve their request? The upstream pipe?
Oh, I see. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, no worries. The question is that the company identifies there's no available upstream capacity after the construction of this project, but does not identify any upstream capacity constraints, which seems in conflict with each other.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, it looks like this project did take the available capacity, and so no capacity expansion was planned to be needed specifically towards this area, perhaps. And so that's what's noted there.
Maybe a little more in depth too on some of the numbers. So this indicates there was a 431 MFCH available before the project. Elsewhere in this data response, it identifies that the project's estimated peak demand was 1,499 MFCFH, so pretty far in excess of the 431. Let me know if I've got my units crossed or those things can't be compared, but it seems as though in comparing those numbers, it would take the full available capacity and then some. So I'm just a little confused by that data.
Yeah, that's a great question. It sounds like we will need to dig into this a little further to be able to address that question.
Okay. Okay. And perhaps I would appreciate, like, if it's a fulsome answer. Well, no, I guess this wasn't up. I was going to say if it was upgraded preemptively, but clearly it was not. We're saying there was no capacity. Capacity was not updated, it looks like.
Commissioner Gilman, I can maybe speak a little more to
Sure.
that. Brian Griffiths, member of the gas modeling team. So the way these were evaluated was the point where the project would connect. I'm not exactly familiar with how this project was laid out, but I believe most of them were extensions at the end of a project. So if the project was connecting onto an existing line, the point where it connected to that existing line is where we evaluate how much capacity was there. So in this case, as Megan was saying, the project was likely designed for this customer so that we got to the point that we are at our minimums, but we don't have anything more for anybody downstream. The upstream part is not being brought below any of its minimums. So that's why we are saying that there's no immediate upstream capacity constraint.
Okay, so are you saying the pipe upstream with where, fix my terminology if I messed up, but the pipe upstream where this project is pulling off, you're saying was likely sized in anticipation of this project, and then it just fits perfectly right in?
Yeah, I think I would maybe need to know exactly how this project was laid out, and I don't recall. But I think if you imagine a stub, a piece of pipe that's ending, and this project is at the end of it, the point that we are extending from that stub, that's the portion that this project would refer to. And that piece is only going to be sized for this project. There's no more downstream customers.
Okay. I might add a little color to this. I think as we think it through, I'm still like a little unclear where we are on this one. So perhaps we will add a little color to a follow-up for your folks. I think a sketch and understanding how this relates to the other infrastructure, as well as kind of what all had previously been upsized and when, and if that was in anticipation of this project, would be very helpful to better understanding this actual issue. So if that sounds reasonable, Mr. Piquet, we can just put some actual terminology around that. But I'm thinking right now that's the suite of information that would help us like better understand why at least just these numbers aren't making sense in my head to like understand where we're at here.
Yeah, that sounds good, Commissioner Gilman. We're happy to, if you wanted to issue a specific question there, we're happy to respond to it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think generally it'll be, can we get a sketch of how this project actually interconnects to the surrounding infrastructure from where it's fed and at what point and under what assumptions were those pieces upgraded, upsized, whatever. Do you see any reason that would not work? I'll get you some exact terminology, but that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, we'll get working on that.
Okay. Okay. Gonna move on. We can take this one down to the Canyons project. Canyons, another new business project. Here we also have a differing number of units that was actually identified in the 2024 gas rate case in hearing exhibit 105 ARG 5. This project was shown as 1,500 homes, 250 townhomes, 325 apartments, which totals 2,025 units. The data request in this proceeding identified 750 homes, 325 townhomes for a total of 1,075 units. So about 1,000 fewer units, 950 fewer units. So I was curious if this is the more accurate, more up-to-date information we're seeing in this data request, and if so, any color on when that update was made from the developer to you all.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I might have missed your beginning description here. Was that on a capacity expansion project?
No, Canyons, still new business.
Canyons, okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
it's a difference between what was shown in the 2024 gas rate case, which totaled 2,025 residential units, and what's shown in this data request, which totals 1,075 residential units.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll defer to our gas team experts here.
Sure.
Hello, Commissioner Gilman. I'm Spencer Jones. I'm with the new business team, kind of responsible for handling these capacity projects. So currently, the company does not have any recent updates that was provided outside this docket. The source of the initial values in the 2024 GRC were from the initial application the company received for the expected full build out of this project. The second values are more reflective of the latest version of the applicants as they come in more iteratively, kind of has how they are currently phasing things out and kind of more those detailed looks into their subdivisions as they build out.
Okay, so I guess is your current expectation that they will build 1,075 residential units or 2,025?
2,000.
You're still expecting 2,000?
Yes.
Okay, but they don't have an application in for the 2,000? Is that like the difference?
This kind of goes back to our initial process where we get that kind of ask for that overview from the developers to kind of understand what they want and what they need for their long-term plans. And then, yes, they start coming in more of their plots and detailed views where we can kind of start deeming their on-site infrastructure design.
Okay. So the infrastructure that the company has built out is anticipating the 2,025 homes.
Yes.
Okay. And what I'm hearing is the developer has not said they don't expect that many, but rather they're having piecemeal applications come in, which at this point in time total a lower total.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. So you haven't received information or understood from the developer that they expect a smaller total build out. It's just that you're seeing more like piecemeal for the more immediate build out come in, which is a smaller number.
That is correct.
Okay. And then for Canyons, let me just open that, sorry. I wasn't sure what direction that was gonna go because I really sincerely did not know how many units we were looking at. Okay, so let me see, I'm just seeing how many units. Are you aware how many units were in the 2025 actual data that was provided? I think, yeah, do you know that?
We don't currently know the exact numbers. We could definitely take some time to find that for you if needed. Maybe from more a high level.
Oh, I found it.
Oh, did
Sorry.
you? Okay.
Page 3 of the data specific to that project, 1 active residential premise.
I believe that is what we currently have for the CMM data portion of it. I can speak to maybe a bit that from a higher level, we can confirm that the construction of the townhomes have been completed, and in addition to a few commercial properties.
Okay. So this project started in 2022. Do you understand from the developer any difference in the pace from what they were originally expecting? Trying to understand if this started in 2022 and as of 2025, we only had 1 active residential property. It sounds like we may have a few more active now. But in the first 3 years, there was 1. Just curious if you have a build out schedule expected from this developer.
We would, of course, need to follow up with the developer. Currently, we do not have an expected build out for them or a kind of comparison that we can make from what they initially gave us.
Okay. When a project applies, do you get a build out schedule? We expect this many units in this year, this many in this year, this many in this year.
We, of course, do our best to try to dig for as much information as possible in that regard. Often enough, they'll kind of give us our build out schedules for their relatively first up and coming phases, and then a more broad sense of expect, phases to come on in 2030 in a more broad year to year basis. For this one, we would, again, have to kind of follow up with the developers to understand that information.
Okay. But you're generally requesting, say fairly accurate, but like in the near term, the next 5 years or whatever, that to be relatively accurate per year, and then you think it gets a little fuzzier when you get on into next decade.
We definitely dig initially with the projects because a lot of these projects require infrastructure to be put out into where they are currently at. So that kind of initial in-service date is kind of the first number that we really need to kind of figure out these projects. And then kind of as the build outs kind of build out, we have the infrastructure out there ready for them.
Okay. But as I'm understanding it, if they perhaps slow down, that's not necessarily some sort of automatic update that is coming to you. That would require you to kind of proactively reach out to the developer at this point to say, hey, what's going on? Is there an update on these build outs?
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just curious on some of these was looking at, especially at what the information provided by the developer, which kind of was shown in each project specific data response, and comparing those. And there's a pretty significant difference. The Canyons development is about 70% higher on estimated peak demand per residential customer than Aurora Highlands, but that could be that your number of units was not accurate. So I'm totally sure on those numbers at this point. That was based on the 1,075. But say for Coal Creek Canyons, we've got about 5 times the per customer expected peak demand as Aurora Highlands. For Aspen Creek, it's about 2 times, 2.5 times, and then Rooney Valley like 8 times what's expected per residential customer from as compared to Aurora Highlands. So kind of going back to that process of working with the developers to ensure it's accurate and how things are going. It is not something I'm familiar with, I guess I would say, to see a residential property within reason that has 8 times the load of another new business residential property per unit. So just curious how that all works with your vetting and discussions with these developers.
Yeah, I can speak to that once again. So not every residential home is the same. For example, like the Coal Creek, customers work all custom homes. So we do have expectation that those are substantially larger than small residentials that you might see. More Highlands Ranch. In addition to that, townhomes often are a lot smaller than what you would find for a single family home. So of course it varies from customer to customer. We usually rely heavily on the data that is provided again from those developments and those kind of utilities, or excuse me, appliances that the customers are providing to us. We use that through our vetting process to kind of try to track down what we feel is a good estimate for the region and the style of home for that, and then try to paste that across those homes that they plan to build. So of course it varies. So I would expect to see variety in all of these.
I don't know much about the Rooney Valley homes. Are those 40,000 square foot homes? How big are these homes?
I could speak a bit to that. So again, there we did identify a bit of a discrepancy in there. Based on the company's review, the company did find that the peak demand of the overall project was supposed to be 540 million standard cubic feet, and that was consistent with what we provided in July's 2025. However, the current number of homes is much greater than what we provided in the July 2025, which is more reflective of the applicant's initial request.
So what's the total number of homes for Rooney Valley?
We need to have a follow-up with the developer to actually find that number. But yes, it's much larger than that 640, I believe it was, or 675.
675.
Yeah.
Okay, so you at the time of last summer had the numbers correct for the estimated or requested peak demand, but it did not correlate to an accurate number of units.
That is correct.
Okay. And you don't have that number right now?
We do not.
Okay. I guess we'll just throw out there, are any of the other number of units wrong?
Not to our knowledge at this moment. Those are
Okay.
kind of the main two that we kind of had identified in the last few days and been trying to find for you.
Okay, but Canyons is the higher number from the rate case, not from the data request here, and Aurora Highlands is a bit unknown to be determined. Okay, Coal Creek Canyon Pines is still 90. Aspen Creek is still 315. I assume, yeah. So another kind of question on process is, I know you had identified like townhomes use a different amount than multifamily, use a different amount than single family, but the company does not estimate them in that way, right? It's just per unit and does not decipher necessarily like that 6 decatherms per year per month, sorry, expected usage is not, there's no different assumption for townhomes, right? Or multifamily.
I'm going to again defer to the gas team here, but I think it's specific to the requests that are coming in, right? We don't treat every request the same. We look at what's being installed, what the developer needs.
Okay. So on
Wait, before we move on, Richard, did you have anything to add on to that?
Oh, you nailed it. I mean, once we get those appliances, usually in those townhomes, we do see that the appliances are smaller and demand less BTUs of gas.
okay. So similar to Aurora Highlands for the Coal Creek Canyon Pines, I think the company had identified with regard to the upstream capacity, let me just make sure I'm on the right one. Yeah. Had identified with respect to upstream capacity question that there was 12 MSCFH available upstream capacity prior to the project and 4 after the project, but the project itself has a peak design day peak hour demand of 46.6 MSCFH. So maybe someone can help me understand how these numbers work together, because it seems as though in your assessment of upstream capacity, you only reduced it by 8 MFCFH, although are saying that the project itself is 46.6.
This might be a question for the modeling team in particular in advance of the project. So I might see if someone from that team can chime in here.
Yeah, we'll see if Brian can join us. If not, I'm Grace Jones. I'm the manager of gas strategic planning. Nice to see you, Commissioner Gilman. I think in regards to all of these new business projects for that particular data set, what would be really helpful is maps to be completely transparent, which I do think were provided as part of the gas rate cases since these are historical projects. So that shouldn't be too challenging to uncover and provide over. But I think the map is going to show when we're looking too far upstream from the project, the capacity is going to be showing really significant different numbers. And so I think maybe a recommendation I would have is for you to potentially pose us with some questions, but we could also come back with a more fulsome analysis of how we conducted that analysis. Where is the pipe in relation to the other piece of pipe, so that it can make a lot more sense. But that's just my recommendation.
That would be very helpful. I'll try and put together that similar to the other one we were looking at, which was like, I think the Aurora Highlands. Yeah, similar to that, just trying to understand, these numbers don't add up.
Yeah.
And there must be something I'm not seeing or understanding, and want to understand like how this analysis is actually done and how these numbers make sense.
I think trying to understand hydraulic modeling without a picture of what we're looking at is pretty challenging. So I think that will help.
Okay. Okay, cool. That works. Yeah, Mr. Griffith.
I can try to explain that one. I think pictures definitely would help. I think the previous one I was trying to explain a stub type scenario, and in that case, the project was at the end of that stub. So it's kind of like at that point where you have a localized low point. So that's where the evaluation was done that we were out of capacity. In this case, the Coal Creek Pines project, a little bit downstream, was the low point in this vicinity. So that's why it doesn't work out, the low point in terms of pressure. So I think it was maybe a few miles downstream. That was the end of that IP pipeline. And that was the point that we needed to maintain above a certain pressure. So it didn't work out directly as you add the load, subtract that much, and that's how much you might have remaining, because you had to consider that point that was a little bit farther downstream. And what they actually had to the inlet of their, I believe, regulator station was the structure or of their infrastructure at that point. If that makes sense, I definitely think maps would help, but hopefully that will help a little bit.
Let me try in my brain. If you pull it up further upstream than what your numbers indicate, then you're pulling it off at a higher pressure, and the pressure differential is not as much further down wherever you're doing this calculation.
Something like that. I think it's the fact that you need to keep your eye on that point farther down. So
you need a picture, but okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving just because I have still have to get into capacity expansion.
Just one quick thing on that might help is just remember that capacity is different than supply. And so when we have that design day peak hour gas demand pulling off, that's going to be a different value than how much capacity do we have upstream. So that's how much load can you take at that exact point, not how much load can you take downstream. So just want to try to differentiate between capacity of a pipeline, which is how much it can move at that exact point, and supply, which is how much molecules are actually in the gas. But we can explain that a little bit more in our follow-up as well.
That would be good. I'm gonna play this back later and try to sort through all of that, but yes, in writing, like better understanding how that works. Just real quick on the Prospect Valley Dairy, I understand this is an RNG supply point. And just wanted to understand just any like really high level details on that, like how much RNG is being purchased and you know, where that's coming in, or I don't know that that was part of a clean heat plan, so just like curious on the general setup of that.
I would just point out that this is one we addressed in our notice this morning,
Okay.
where the company
Okay.
explained that it's not purchased any RNG from this project, and it's now funded through the clean heat budget.
Okay, sorry, the company hasn't purchased any RNG from it?
Correct.
Planning to? I guess what's the purpose of the pipe if you're not gonna? What's the use of it, I guess?
I can't speak to those issues, but I was just pointing out what's in our notice. But
Okay, thank you.
Just a little bit of clarity on that one. So you need natural gas to make RNG. And so this is actually a new business project in which they are requesting natural gas from us in order to produce their RNG. We are not currently taking it back onto our system.
Thank you. That was helpful. Excellent. But it says that there, well, I guess sort of light bulb, but in the data response for that particular project, it says no load. But you are describing a load. So I guess we have no expectation on why you expect the sales to be there, which are questions we asked in the data response, but the company had responded that there is no load.
I can follow up on that, certainly. I know that the RNG does come back into our system, but we're just a transporter. It's not that the company itself is purchasing that gas, but I can follow up on the demand piece just to confirm that it's in fact zero. And
Okay.
it may be, that it's not peak. So I'll figure it out.
Yeah, if you can follow up on that, and then the accuracy of any like responses from the original data request in terms of annual usage, peak demand expectation, what that's based on, that would be helpful because I think all of those were given a zero before, and it would be helpful to understand if that's not accurate. Okay. Okay. All right. I think I'm ready to ask a couple questions about capacity expansion projects. Now I'm speaking even faster than before. In looking at these, for each of the capacity expansion projects, we requested you identify downstream new business projects that came online in the 5 years preceding capacity expansion projects, kind of so we could see the relationship and what's going on downstream. So now when I talk about new business projects, it's the ones from that list of the identified downstream new business projects. So I know it's difficult to explain, but I think we're all on the same page on that, Mr. Fouquet, unless that's confusing.
Makes sense.
Okay, cool. In looking at that data, let's see. Maybe we could pull it up. I copied the one second. Shoot, I'm trying to move fast. Sorry. It is document 6, Ms. Federico. This is the public version, so it just doesn't identify the names of the developments or a number if it's less than 15. I think those are like the primary differentiations on the public version, but the data is pretty similar. So we'll pull that up. So this was submitted by the company. I added that peach row. So I will say that is a deviation from what you submitted, but I added it just to do some quick math for us as we discussed today. Okay, so as we look at these, you know, one thing we had the company provide the projected peak and projected daily average just a question in the data here. Ms. Thorpe, maybe you know this. For daily average, that like literally is average for the year. If I multiply that by 365, should that come out to be the annual usage?
Yeah, just looking at the spreadsheet here. Yeah, I think for actual daily average, that is correct.
Okay, so that multiplied by 365 is annual usage, basically. Okay, and then I was curious if for these subdivisions all, you know, in the confidential version, we have an exact number of premises, understandably with the 15 rule. Those have been a bit obscured in this version. But I was curious if the data the company provides here, I think, is probably based on the latest you had in 2025. I was curious if there are circumstances in which the total count of active premises. Okay, so the total count of active premises should be reflective of the actual data. We're not like using a higher number, like if it's not built out, you're not using the total built out number. Like this data is based on the active premises at the time the data was pulled, right?
That generally sounds correct. I believe 18B8 also had a time frame specified. If I recollect, it was within 5 years of the data pool. So within the 5 years preceding last summer, roughly.
Right. The new business came online within the 5 years preceding. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think my question here really is, as we look at the projected, no matter which column we look at, right? If we look at the peak hourly, the peak day, or the daily average, they all actually operate in the same ratio, right? So they all change by the same amount. As we compare the projected to the actual, I just did it here for columns D and E. We see really across the board the actual be a fairly small fraction of the projected value. So this holds, and this percentage comes out the same whether we do it on peak hour, peak day, or average day. And so I actually totaled it at the bottom too. If we scroll all the way down to the data, which is 287 is when the data ends. I put a total line there. So in total, we saw the actual come in at 3% of the projected. And I was curious, any like explanation on what we're looking at here? That seems like a pretty significant deviation.
Yeah. So I think part of this could tie to your inquiry about subdivision 104. More generally and broadly speaking, though, I think the stage of build out and occupancy are likely to be some major contributors as well.
Okay. And let's go to subdivision 104. So that's on line 109. This has like a kind of wildly high figures. Are those figures a mistake, or there's something else going on there?
Yeah, so upon receiving the notice of topics for today, we did review per the request, and it did appear to have a few factors weighing in. So one being that starting with that peak hour projected load did appear to be double counted. And additionally, while the projected value is based off the application or applications, depending on the line for new gas service, it appears through discussions with the customer likely, it was determined there was a unit error on the application from which we derived the data. And so it would also need to be divided by 1,000 to correct for that unit error from the data source.
Okay, would you mind to update that one and just provide that summary as to why, and then just resubmit this document? Are any others inaccurate in a way similar to that you can identify?
Not to my knowledge at this time. I think, as you brought up, that was the big outlier.
Okay. So I mean, I've got an active version of this. I think, you know, even if I make it something quite rational, I think many of the other categories are still that was just one. It has not swayed the entire situation. So even if we look at, say, the first project on the list, which is the Breckenridge reinforcement, which didn't include that project, that total group of projects is at 16% of the projected. And so now the data you're pulling here was likely the most recent time frame, right? At that point in 2025.
Which data in particular?
That's whole sheet.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so the projected values were based off of the
from the beginning, right?
Yep.
Yeah, the actual, I guess I would say.
And correct, CMM data was as of the date of the data pool last summer.
Okay.
For the actuals.
I'm trying to figure out what's rational, frankly, to ask as a follow-up here to have you all provide more color on this. It's difficult. I mean, I'm looking at data that shows the actual usage is well less than 20% in almost every case, as what the company projects or the developer projects or whoever is projecting. So I don't want this to be like a giant fishing expedition, but it feels like really difficult data to comprehend. So I don't know. I mean, a lot of these subdivisions are very small number of units, so I don't anticipate we're having a huge like occupancy problem in the data in a lot of it. I don't know. Do you have any ideas for me if there's a really obvious way to remove like some data that would be inaccurate in these? I mean, this seems to indicate something rather substantial in the estimate. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we get this more accurate? I don't want to say it's off by this much if there's like occupancy problems or something that could be sussed out by additional information, but I also don't want to send you on a fishing expedition that can't be done.
Yeah, definitely. We could look to pull 2026 actual data as well to try to help further vet, and perhaps I can get with the team here to get some other ideas of, you know, what else we could potentially look to provide.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Perhaps we could just have this and kind of amend on. Clearly, like if the number of active premises is different, we'd have to update that as well. So I think that would be really helpful. Thank you. No, I'm really just grasping, like I want to understand what this is showing. And these are pretty dramatic percentages to be looking at.
Yeah, I would just second Megan's suggestion that pulling data from 2026 would be really valuable. Because we do only update our CMM module once a year, this means that this data was probably like all the way from the April timeframe of 2025. So it's pretty outdated at this point. And if the builders were still developing, that can severely impact what CMM is going to project for that load. Additionally, if we don't have like a full year of occupancy, sometimes the linear regression can understate the amount of gas demand that they might use, like if they've only been in the home for a couple months. So as a first step, I would say that that's a great idea and support that as well.
Can I have one more suggestion? I mean, I don't want it to take forever too, so I want to be like cognizant of what I'm asking for and make sure that's something that can be done in weeks, not months.
Okay.
I wonder if you can color code or whatever in service date year. And that might better help to flag those that might be so new they're less accurate. You you know, if we're seeing one that's 2023, more likelihood it's occupied than 2026 or 20, well, that wouldn't be in there, but 2025. Just an idea of like another way to help shed some color on, you know, if we're seeing every time the 2025s are more skewed because maybe they're not occupied, whatever. That's just another idea on maybe how to deal with the newness of the premises to like help identify that.
So the challenge is going to be that for each of these subdivisions, what we have to do is actually go into our mapping system and pull the active premises. When we do that, it will say when the premise became active, but it's not going to be like assigned to the subdivision. It's going to be assigned to each individual premise. And then we put that into the CMM pull to get that data out. So my concern is if we want this to take weeks and not months, we might need to pare down the number of subdivisions that we look at, because this is looking like a pretty large list. And well, then I'd also,
probably, sorry.
Yeah, no,
I was
I'd also
thinking
caution,
a lot of these are only a handful. So it might be
Yeah.
one, you know, like, I don't want you to like, yeah, I just
Yeah.
want it to be whatever's rational, but I would like to understand if there's an analytical reason for what I'm looking at to better understand that. Because frankly, they're wild percentages of
Yeah.
the projected load. And I think it's something we all need to understand better. Why are we looking at loads that are 2% of what was projected? So whatever is rational, I'd like to be reasonable with what we get, but I would really like to like just get some more light on this. Okay, I am gonna move on for just a minute since we have like 10 minutes left. Okay. There, okay, let me see. Just a question about terminology. There's a few circumstances, I think, where the number of premises listed on the confidential version of this varies from the number of firm downstream residential customers, like it was added. Well, if it's not added, I just answered my own question there. Let me see.
You have the document, so you can point to the spot. Perfect.
I will just say, because I'll probably have you follow up on this, just given our time. In each of the project-specific responses for the capacity expansion projects, we had asked the number of firm residential customers added downstream in the 5 years prior. And numbers were given for that. Then on this document, numbers were given for the number of active premises in the preceding 5 years. In every case, those numbers are not the same number. And perhaps we inadvertently used like a term of art that's meaning something different to you, but it's a little confusing to me to see in one portion of the data response a different number of basically downstream new residential customers in the last 5 years than on the other data source. So are you clear the two areas I'm looking at comparing? And I would say in almost every case, and it might be the meaning of the word premise, but I'm just hoping you can shed more light on to me why I'm seeing these numbers not align. It's for every project. I will say in almost every project, the number of new active premises in the 5 years that are on that downstream project list that we're looking at here is lower, often in some cases significantly lower than the number identified on the project sheets, which was called number of firm residential customers added downstream in the 5 years prior. The one exception is the Winter Park tie, which is the exact opposite. So I was trying to be onto something, and then the other one went the other direction, and I'm not sure, but some explanation on what each of those means, since they are different, and I kind of thought they would be the same numbers.
Yeah, definitely. So looking at, the added downstream of the identified various capacity expansion projects in the 5 years prior to the time the project was completed. So that time frame was interpreted as 5 years prior to the in-service date across the board. Okay. And so to do that, we looked at new service install dates and then looked in that time frame. And then further down in the request was the other item And I think there was a time frame on that, trying to find it here, that was different. So that's certainly a part of that, I think.
They were both 5 years. They were both 5 years. I don't want to spend our last 5 minutes on it, but I will put that in writing, and ideally we can just get some, how did you interpret them? Why are these different numbers would be very helpful. If we scroll up just a touch, Ms. Federico, subdivisions 70 and 71 are large subdivisions identified here in the Rampart Range capacity expansion project, especially 71. And it looks like that is, the kind of the predominant need, I guess, preceding the Rampart Range project. Is that a fair assessment? With 1,081 units added?
It's tough just going off of a spreadsheet. I think this is another one where a map would be invaluable to positively answer that for that specific subdivision.
Okay. And do we have a full build out estimation for that subdivision? And would the upsizing of Rampart Range be based on a full build out expectation, as was discussed prior for new business projects?
I don't have that information before me right now, but I imagine we could provide an answer on that.
Okay. I don't want to divulge the name, although I do believe there is a document in rate case somewhere which already links these two names, but I'll look into that later. I have a number from the a different gas rate case that identifies the total number there. But to the extent that subdivision 71 is already under construction and its full build out, let's just say for argument's sake, includes a significantly higher number than the active premises, the Rampart Range build out would have been built to accommodate that build out number, from what I heard earlier today. Is that accurate?
I think I'll need a map just to, I don't remember which one's subdivision 70 or 71, sorry. So it's difficult for me to recollect exactly.
And I think I'm picking up your question, Commissioner Gilman. So if this subdivision applied, paid the amount that they were supposed to, and we are in agreement with them, then yes, that would be included in our hydraulic model and considered during our annual capacity expansion planning process, for which this Rampart Range project was identified. So to the extent that all of that load has been applied for, then yes, it would be in the hydraulic model and considered when we designed these capacity expansion projects.
Okay. And if projects specific to that development have been showing up in rate cases, it's fair to assume that process has occurred.
I would make that assumption, correct.
Okay. Okay, let me see. Also just curious, kind of the we've got a number of kind of more generally, I guess, for you, Ms. Jones, I've been looking through rate cases back to 2017, just like a hobby, and have been identifying the word Breckenridge comes up a lot. There's a lot of Summit County expenditures, right? Like there's been growth in those areas, and I think we generally know that. Just like back of the envelope, looking at what I've seen in a lot of these rate cases, combining Breckenridge, Dillon Valley, other Summit County, other kind of Grand County related that are all subject to the MEP project. I've got about $32 million worth of capacity expansions in the past several rate cases. And I'm just curious, like, what is the internal process as those kind of intermediate capacity expansions are taking place to look upstream at that time to understand if the broader system is capable of what is being added downstream?
So I think to answer your question, I would maybe reiterate that our annual capacity expansion planning process does look all the way from the supply point down to the end use customers. So we are completing that analysis. However, we're only looking 5 years into the future, and we can only kind of apply growth for things such as residential and small commercial, because we don't want to overbuild our system either and have this system where there's a lot of capacity reserve and nobody's using it. So we kind of have the intention that first they come and then we will build. So inherent in that process, I think, is the risk that there will be a large development or several large developments in an area that could cause an upstream reinforcement that you weren't aware of. And that's sort of the balancing act of planning, is making sure that you're accounting for enough normal growth that you are keeping ahead and making sure our system stays reliable, but not assuming that we're going to have this massive amount of growth that we're doing projects that are too large.
And the like first they come and then you will build concept that you just talked about, that's kind of exclusive to the below 10 MCFH developments, right? Because I think we were hearing before, if you're above that level, you get this whole special process where we're working with you to understand. And as a matter of fact, most of the infrastructure is built before the premises are built in order to serve them.
The distribution infrastructure is built before the, they come in and build. In regards to the upstream reinforcement, yes, we do a capacity check to make sure that the upstream system is sufficient. But what we're seeing with a lot of these new business projects is that it will knock down a minimum inlet pressure by like 1 PSI and then 1 PSI. And the remedy would be to replace 10 feet. We're obviously not going to go in and replace 10 feet and then replace 10 feet and replace 10 feet. So we keep them in our model and review them on an annual basis as an aggregate, so that we're doing one larger project to address that kind of upstream system reinforcement need, as opposed to doing kind of piecemeal projects along the way. The other thing is, if it's an issue that we can mitigate through an operational measure like bypassing a regulator station, we might do that for a couple of years as well to try to, again, mitigate having to do a bunch of capacity expansion projects upstream. So I think it's the latter. The larger projects are being considered in our capacity expansion planning process, but we're waiting effectively for the upstream system to have a large enough issue that it makes sense to go in and remediate.
Okay. And to the extent that you're modeling, if you get a very large new development, thousands of homes, at the time you get that, though, you would be modeling upstream as part of your process and identifying that need kind of in real time rather than waiting for those units to show up, right? Like that would be part of your process.
Correct.
Okay. So if you had, say, thousands of homes that necessitates an upstream capacity expansion, that would be identified as part of assessing the new business project.
If the new business project was above that threshold, yes. And then depending on how bad,
the threshold
again,
10,
yeah,
okay.
Yes. And then depending on how significant the issue is, we might scope a project at that time or just wait until our annual process. So I think in the data sheets that we provided you, a good example would be on the capacity expansion projects, specifically those located in like Denver Front Range. There's a question in there and I can't recall what it is, but it's like, what's the hydraulic analysis results? And one of the compressors that we obviously keep an eye on is the Marshall compressor station. And so we were able to numerate like how much did it drop the inlet pressure to the Marshall compressor station. So we're logging it in that way, not necessarily logging the scope of the project associated with remediating it.
And I think there were several projects here that did end up reducing the inlet pressure into the Marshall compressor station, right?
Right. And we have a very integrated system. That's definitely a critical compressor station on our system in order to maintain reliable service. So.
Okay. And so those projects individually didn't necessarily like straw that broke the camel's back. Now we have an issue, but clearly we already have an issue in the Eastern Mountain system, and we already have an issue that the company is trying to address in terms of maintaining more pressure with other infrastructure projects going into that compressor station in the first place.
I'm not sure what additional infrastructure projects going into Marshall are being done right now, but yes, no individual new business request caused like a large scale capacity expansion project. It's really the aggregate of everything.
Right. But if a new business project reduces a critical pressure into there, it is contributing in some way, but not
Yes.
the sole reason.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think we're clearly at time. I think I've asked most of the questions about this data that I wanted to ask. And I'll work on Mr. Piquet's follow-up, especially reiterating some of these things, but I think you already know a few of them. So we can take this down, Mr. Federico. Thank you. You already know a few of them, but I will try to get that out as soon as I can, especially while they're fresh in my mind before moving on to other topics.
Yep, that all sounds right.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, we'll get that out. Curious, just so we're like of the same expectation. I think some of this information already exists and it's already available. I think it's just like the 2026 update to the downstream new business projects might be more.
Might be the largest,
like
maybe
full,
a piece of
but
analysis as part of this. Yeah.
sounds like most of the other maps should already be a thing that exists and kind of diagram as to how things connect, and updates as to accurate numbers of customers and things should be relatively straightforward. So I'm hoping we're in the weeks, not months realm here, and that will be my expectation in issuing that. And I guess I would say, especially for those things that are more straightforward, feel free to bifurcate your response and get us those things that are immediately available, as soon as you have them. And, perhaps just that 2026 stuff takes a little longer is my guess.
Yeah, we can certainly look to do that. Get you the stuff we have faster.
Okay, that's awesome. I don't have anything else. Anything else from you, Mr. Piquet, or your team?
No, nothing else from our end. Hopefully this was helpful to you, and just wanted to thank you to all the gas folks on our side that joined us today.
Yeah, thanks to your folks for joining, and I will look at what was submitted last night or this morning, whenever that was, as soon as I'm able. And thanks to you all for making the time, and our team, Ms. Federico, as usual, for driving us through here. Yeah, thanks for getting this scheduled. I'll send that follow-up and just crank it out. I want to literally understand what you're sending in and be sure we are in response representing back the most accurate version of things. And so this has been helpful to sort that out and better understand what's been submitted and what else we can get to make, in some cases, things more accurate, so that we're working with the best information going forward. So
yep, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you.
folks. We are adjourned today. Thanks so much. Bye.